This is an Oscar-level suspense film directed by the Canadian filmmaker Denis Villeneuve, who later went on to create renowned films such as Prisoners, Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, and Dune. However, Incendies was Villeneuve's first masterpiece that shook the film industry. Its story is astonishingly shocking, enough to subvert any audience's perception. First, I just need to mention that this video is a movie recap and does not promote or endorse any religious or political views. The story begins with a pair of twin siblings, Jeanne and Simon. They live with their mother, Nawal, in a small town in Canada. The three of them lead a simple and peaceful life. However, one day, after returning from a swim, Nawal suddenly becomes unusually silent. Not long after, she passes away in melancholy. Before dying, Nawal entrusts a lawyer friend with 3 letters for her children. However, these letters are not all addressed to Jeanne and Simon. They are required to deliver the first letter to their father and the second letter to their brother. Only after completing these 2 tasks can they open the third letter. It is only at this moment that Jeanne and Simon learn that they actually have an older brother. Furthermore, their father, whom they had never met, is still alive. Until now, the twins had always believed that their father had died in the war. Simon dismisses their mother's final request as a dying woman's prank and doesn't take it seriously. But Jeanne feels that her mother's last wish carries a deeper meaning. Determined to uncover the truth about their origins, she embarks on a journey alone. Since their mother had never spoken about their father or brother during her lifetime, Jeanne has no leads. She can only start by investigating her mother's past. However, she knows very little, only that Nawal was born in a Middle Eastern country where Muslims and Christians had been in long-standing conflict and where civil war had raged for years, with peace being restored only recently. To fulfill her mother's dying wish and find her father and brother, Jeanne carries her mother's cross necklace and the only photograph of Nawal from her youth. Alone, she travels to her mother's homeland. Her first stop is a university where, 35 years ago, Nawal had studied at the age of 25. Unfortunately, after so many years, most of Nawal's former professors have retired, and many student records were lost due to the war. Jeanne finds no trace of her mother there. However, an elderly professor recognizes the background of Nawal's old photograph. It was taken in a prison in the southern part of the country. That prison had once held political prisoners but had been abandoned for years. Jeanne cannot understand. Why would her mother have taken a photo inside a prison? Puzzled, she travels to the remote village where Nawal was born and raised. Unfortunately, all of Nawal's family and relatives had perished in the war. Jeanne can only ask the local villagers about her mother's past. Most of the villagers are Christians, and at first they warmly welcome Jeanne. But when she shows them the photograph of Nawal in her youth, their attitudes instantly change. They glare at her with contempt and hatred, and even drive her out of the village. This reminds Jeanne of the prison photo. Could her mother have done something terrible to deserve such hostility? Determined to uncover the truth, Jeanne visits the abandoned prison where Nawal's photograph was taken. Although the prison had been deserted for years, Jeanne manages to track down an old prison guard who once worked there. The old guard immediately recognizes Nawal from the photograph. She had been prisoner number 72, known among inmates as the woman who sings. Under Jeanne's persistent questioning, the old guard hesitantly recounts the past. It turns out that, in her youth, Nawal had assassinated a high-ranking leader of a Christian militia group. As a result, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison. During her imprisonment, the guards used various forms of torture to force her to reveal her accomplices, but the strong-willed Nawal never gave in. In that prison, filled with screams and suffering, there was one cell that stood out, the cell of Nawal. In this cell, unlike the rest, there was always the sound of hopeful and unyielding singing. This is why the other prisoners called her the woman who sings. Time slowly passed, and soon, it was just 1 year before Nawal was to be released. However, the rulers in power did not want to see her leave the prison as a heroic figure. To prevent this, they sent a man named Abou, a brutal executioner, to deal with Nawal. Unlike conventional methods of interrogation, Abou subjected Nawal to repeated assaults, which eventually resulted in her pregnancy. Despite being tormented both physically and mentally, Nawal never gave in. She endured the pain, gave birth to the child in the prison's infirmary, and survived until her sentence was complete, finally regaining her freedom. Hearing this, Jeanne was utterly shocked. She had never imagined that her mother had endured such a tragic past. It became clear to her that the brother she had never met was actually the child Nawal had given birth to in prison after being assaulted by Abou. No wonder their mother had never spoken of this child. However, the old prison guard knew very little about the fate of the baby. Fortunately, he was able to provide Jeanne with the address of the nurse who had delivered the child. Before visiting the nurse, Jeanne contacted her brother Simon in Canada and shared everything she had discovered. Upon learning of their mother's ordeal, Simon was equally stunned. Without hesitation, he traveled to the Middle East to join his sister on their quest. Following the lead given by the former prison guard, the siblings soon found the nurse who had delivered their mother's child. From her, Jeanne and Simon learned an even more shocking truth. Nawal had not given birth to just one child in prison. She had given birth to twins, a boy and a girl. According to prison regulations, children born to political prisoners were to be drowned immediately. But the compassionate nurse could not bear to let that happen. She secretly rescued the twins and, once Nawal was released, returned them to her. Only at this moment did Jeanne and Simon finally understand. Their biological father was none other than the executioner, Abou. But if that was the case, then who was their older brother? Had Nawal already given birth to a child before she was imprisoned? At this point, the story shifts to Nawal's perspective, revealing the incredible past that shaped her life. It all began more than 40 years ago. Nawal's homeland was deeply divided between Christians and Muslims, with constant conflicts between the two groups. Amid this turmoil, Nawal, who was born into a Christian family, fell in love with a young Muslim man. Naturally, their relationship was met with fierce opposition from both families and their respective religious communities. Left with no choice, Nawal and her lover planned to elope, but before they could escape, Nawal's two brothers caught them. At that time, and in that place, elopement was considered a grave offense. Without hesitation, Nawal's brothers shot and killed the Muslim man. Just as they were about to execute their own sister as well, their grandmother intervened and saved Nawal's life. However, what no one had realized was that Nawal was already pregnant. Because abortion was strictly forbidden by Christian doctrine, Nawal was forced to give birth to the child. After the baby was born, her family sent him to an orphanage, but Nawal's kind-hearted grandmother secretly used a steel needle and ink to mark 3 black dots on the baby's heel, hoping that mother and child might one day recognize each other. Nawal made a solemn vow that she would one day find her lost child. After giving birth under her grandmother's arrangement, Nawal was sent to the city to live with an uncle, where she was given the chance to pursue an education. Her grandmother told her that only through education could she change her fate and reclaim her child. Determined, Nawal studied tirelessly, eventually earning admission to a respectable university. She had planned to retrieve her son from the orphanage once she graduated and became financially independent. However, just as she completed her studies, civil war broke out in full force. At that time, her son was just 6 years old. Fearing for his safety, Nawal set out on a journey to find him. After a long and arduous journey, she finally made it back to her hometown, only to find it reduced to rubble by the war. Even the orphanage had been leveled by artillery fire. Despite the devastation, Nawal did not find any children's bodies among the ruins, giving her a glimmer of hope. She then learned from surviving villagers that the orphanage's children had possibly been relocated to a refugee camp in a nearby city. Determined, she continued her search. On the way, she came across a bus full of Muslim refugees. As a Christian, Nawal feared conflict, so she quickly removed the cross necklace from her neck and wrapped a scarf around her head, disguising herself as a Muslim woman before boarding the bus. Exhausted from her journey, she soon fell asleep. When she awoke, the bus had been stopped at a checkpoint. Outside, the driver was negotiating with a group of armed Christian militants. It was unclear what was said, but suddenly, the leader of the militants shot the driver dead. Then, without warning, the other militants opened fire on the bus. When the gunfire finally ceased, only Nawal and a Muslim mother and her young daughter remained alive. Desperate to survive, Nawal pulled out her hidden cross necklace, revealing her Christian identity. She then lied, claiming that the little Muslim girl was her own daughter. The militants hesitated for a moment before letting them go, but as soon as Nawal and the girl stepped off the bus, the militants set it on fire, burning the child's mother alive inside. Watching her mother perish in the flames, the little girl broke free from Nawal's arms and ran toward the burning bus, screaming. The militants, showing no mercy, shot the girl dead on the spot. The horror and grief of that moment shattered something inside Nawal. By the time she finally arrived in the city where the refugee camp was supposed to be, she found that the entire area had been obliterated in a massive assault by the Christian army. The city was littered with corpses. There were no survivors in the refugee camp. As she stood among the ruins, thinking of her missing son, Nawal's faith in God, faith that had sustained her since childhood, crumbled. She renounced her belief in Christianity and joined a Muslim militia where she became an undercover agent infiltrating Christian forces. Before long, Nawal got her chance. She assassinated a high-ranking leader of the Christian militant group. For this, she was captured, imprisoned, and tortured, where she was ultimately violated by the executioner Abou. When she became pregnant, Nawal tried to end the pregnancy herself, but the unborn children, defying all odds, survived. Eventually, she gave up on harming herself and gave birth to a pair of twins, a boy and a girl. To her relief, the kind-hearted nurse who had delivered them not only took care of them in her absence but also returned them to Nawal once she was released from prison. With the help of her Muslim allies, Nawal took her children to Canada, where they finally lived in peace. She named them Jeanne and Simon and raised them alone. Over the years, Nawal secretly continued searching for her firstborn son, hoping to reunite her family. But no matter how hard she tried, she never found a trace of him. Then, one day, while swimming at a public pool with her daughter Jeanne, she caught sight of a young man with 3 small birthmarks on his heel. It was an unmistakable mark, one that she and her grandmother had placed on her lost son many years ago. Before her death, Nawal left behind a will, guiding Jeanne and Simon to uncover the truth about their father and missing brother. Now, Jeanne and Simon had finally learned from the nurse that their biological father was none other than the executioner Abou. But where was Abou now? And what had happened to their long-lost brother? Was he even still alive? With no answers, Jeanne and Simon turned to their mother's lawyer for help. Through extensive investigation, the lawyer discovered that after the war, Abou had disappeared. Some rumors claimed he was dead, while others suggested he had fled and changed his identity in a foreign country. As for their missing brother, his fate was just as uncertain. However, the lawyer managed to track down a retired warlord who had once led the attack on the orphanage. This warlord had been a prominent figure in the Muslim militia. Since Nawal had assassinated a Christian leader, she was considered a hero in his eyes. Out of respect for her, the warlord agreed to tell Jeanne and Simon everything he knew, and what he revealed left the siblings and the audience utterly shaken to their core. The revelation sent chills down Jeanne and Simon's spines. It turned out that when the warlord led the attack on the Christian village where the orphanage was located, he did not slaughter the children. Instead, he took them back to a military base where they were trained to become ruthless killing machines for the war. Among them, Nawal's son, Nihad, stood out as the most gifted marksman. As the years passed, young Nihad became a well-known sniper for the Muslim militia. However, during a battle, he was captured by the Christian armed forces. But instead of executing him, they transformed him into a brutal executioner, one who specialized in torturing prisoners. And the prison where Nihad worked was the same prison where Nawal was once held. As an executioner, Nihad abandoned his former identity and took on a new name, Abou. The man Jeanne and Simon had been searching for, their father and their long-lost brother, was actually the same person. Their father was none other than the executioner, Abou. On that fateful day at the swimming pool when Nawal spotted a man with 3 birthmarks on his heel, she instantly recognized him as her long-lost son. Overcome with emotion, she rushed forward, eager to reunite with him. But when she finally got a closer look at his face, she was struck with horror and revulsion. That face, the face of her beloved son, was also the face of the man who had assaulted her in prison. Abou, however, had no memory of Nawal. He did not recognize her at all. The unbearable shock and heartbreak proved too much for Nawal to bear. Shortly after, she passed away, consumed by grief. Following the warlord's lead, Jeanne and Simon quickly tracked down Abou. He was now living in Canada, leading a quiet life as a janitor. To fulfill their mother's final wish, the siblings handed him 2 letters. One letter was from prisoner number 72.
Je vous écris en tremblant. Je vous ai reconnu. Je suis votre numéro 72. Je vous ai reconnu. Vous ne m'avez pas reconnu. Cette lettre vous sera remise par nos enfants. À travers eux, je veux vous dire que vous êtes encore vivant. Mais bientôt vous vous tairez. Je le sais.
The second letter was from a mother to her lost son, filled with sorrow and longing.
Je parle au fils. Je ne parle pas au bourreau. C'est la promesse que je t'ai faite à ta naissance, mon fils. Je t'ai cherché toute ma vie. Je t'ai trouvé. Toi, tu ne pouvais pas me reconnaître. Tu as ton tatouage sur le talon droit. Je l'ai vu. Tu es né de l'amour. Ton frère et ta sœur sont donc aussi nés de l'amour. Quoi qu'il arrive, je t'aimerai toujours.
Finally, in a letter addressed to Jeanne and Simon, Nawal revealed the entire truth. But after enduring the long journey of uncovering this devastating reality, the siblings no longer felt suffocated by the horror of it all. Instead, they gained a profound understanding of their mother's suffering and her unwavering love for her children. In the final scene, Abou stands alone before Nawal's grave, lost in thought. Then he vanishes without a trace. In a way, he, too, was a victim. War does not just turn cities and villages into scorched ruins, it also leaves the hearts of those caught in it barren and desolate. Incendies has also been translated as scorched or mother's confession, but clearly, Incendies carries the most powerful meaning. Despite the intense controversy surrounding its production and narrative, the film delivers one of the most impactful reflections on war through a shocking ethical tragedy. If you love mystery and suspense films, don't forget to like and support the channel. See you next time.